Hi, my name's Max. I host Claude Code Curious, and recently we had an event where I think Tom excelled himself, speaking alongside two members of the Claude Code team. And I thought it'd be great to catch up with him, dig in a bit more detail. So, Tom, if you'd like to introduce yourself, we'll then leap into a bit of a Q&A on what you've been working on.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Tom. I'm a product engineer at Incident.io, and I currently work on applied AI here, which is essentially like an internal tooling team focused on how we can bring the best of AI to the parts of Incident that are kind of outside engineering. So we're thinking go-to-market, talent, our support, all that kind of thing. And that's what my focus is at the moment, lots of AI.
That'll keep you busy, yeah. And so tell me a bit more about how you ended up here, because it's not like you are, LinkedIn AI engineer, AI engineer, AI engineer. You've worked on a lot of different things. What was that journey like for you, and how does it lead here?
Yeah. Well, weirdly, I was talking to someone the other day about the first interaction I had with machine learning, and it was when I was maybe 12 years old. And I played a game called Robot Battle, where you wrote little battling robots to fight each other in a virtual arena. The sort of meta was who could make the best bot. And people were always trying to make bots that adapted to win. So they would learn over the course of a tournament how to beat its opponents. At some point, someone started posting on these forums about, well, what if we used neural networks to learn about how to beat a bot? Could you learn that? And I, at 12, somehow thought, yeah, I can do this. And I distinctly remember several years later going back and looking at a post that I'd written about, I'm on the verge of making a neural network bot. And of course, I absolutely was not. But that was the earliest introduction. And so in a weird way, coming back to work on AI stuff is like it's not a homecoming in it by any means. But I've had
Right.
various interactions over time. Like I worked at a drug discovery company a couple of jobs ago, and we were using early transformer models. We were using the BERT model from Google back when that came out. But it turns out you can use that on proteins, because proteins are a little bit like a sentence. And
Mhm.
there are parts of the sentence that are very structural and are very important for the function of the sentence or the protein,
Mhm.
and other bits that are a bit more flexible. And the cat sat on the mat. The thes are quite important, but the cat and the mat, you can change those up, or you could say those are very important because they carry the meaning and what the actual function of the sentence is. So we were engineering proteins using that, and that was an introduction to transformers and these sort of large language models. And now joining Incident, I joined our AI team and was working on our AI SRE product for a while, and had great fun doing that. And then a few months ago, the decision was made to spin up this and applied AI team, and try to take what's going on in engineering and out in the world of AI that's moving so quickly at the moment, and bring the best of it to our team with an initial focus on go to market. So looking at sales and commercial sales in particular, and to try and kind of light a rocket engine underneath that team. And it felt like the models and the agents had got to the point where that was really possible now. So exciting time to be working on this.
Absolutely. And what is going on out there at the moment, right? Because a lot of people say there's tons of noise and tons of stuff happening. Do you think that's true?
Well, I have a few touch points that I use to try to work out what's important and what's noise, and kind of sources. So a great one for me is Simon Willison's blog. He's always been a fantastic blogger on various topics, and he has really emerged as someone I think is thinking very clearly and very pragmatically about how to use these large language models for software engineering, what their societal impacts are to an extent, and security as well. I think he's got really good thoughts on security, and some of his experiments have just been fantastic learning resources. So I tend to pay attention to what he's doing, and we'll skim his post, and then if there's something significant, I'll dig into it. And I've also found that there are a few podcasts that I really like. Dwarkesh's podcast is fantastic, and when he has AI leaders on there, I tend to go and listen quite deeply to what they're saying, because they tend to have an insight that transcends the day to day and the week to week hype cycle.
Yeah.
I think there's a few things you can lean on that just remain quite true, which is that a certain level of intelligence is going to get cheaper, and that's a fascinating idea. And also, intelligence is commodity, and that's a very fascinating idea.
I think that's so interesting what you said there about the prices going down and like you kind of bang for your buck, because I do wonder about this sense of abundance where you say, okay, I want to create a little app in Lovable or whatever. Well, I'm just going to send five going because
Yeah.
it's so cheap and it's so fast and it's so good enough. And you start to be more like pruning away the bits you don't want instead of being all in on one path. So for you personally, like where are you spending most of your time at the moment? Do you go for sort of Kanban style board and let it all be sort of the agents doing the work, or you sit down with a notepad and you're sketching out the big picture? What do you actually, what do you do with your AI
That's really
work?
funny. That's really funny because that is actually quite similar. I mean, I was on the train into work this morning with someone who was surprised to see that the first thing I got out of my bag this morning on the train was my notepad, and she said, "Oh, that's very old school." And I said, I keep coming back to a notepad." There's something about it being handwritten and the brain hand paper connection, pen connection that is quite different to typing and certainly different than to thinking with Claude. So I try to start my day away from the AI. We do a lot of discovery work and talking to our users internally. So a lot of it is just listening in on conversations or kind of just hanging out with people, being curious about what their job is, what their work looks like, and where our tools are helping them and where they're not. I personally spend a fair bit of time engineering and building bits of our applied AI infrastructure. So, a big part of that is adding tools to our internal MCP server, or
Mhm.
building skills, or a slightly meta thing, which is building skills to help us build the applied AI products. So skills that help us synchronize knowledge into our knowledge base. That's quite a big one. And so I'm trying to sort of help other people contribute into the tooling and the system that we've built. But I think a big part of what I can do is make it easy for other people around the company when they have an idea to not just come and add a ticket to our backlog, but instead to just contribute that themselves. And that's just going to
Yeah.
get easier and easier as the agents work.
One thing I'm interested in is finding that kind of bite point where it's not too much and too much cruft in one of these essentially text-based kind of guide documents, whether it's an agent or a skill. And so I find that I'm often actually trying to pull stuff back out of the prompt in ways until you get to a file that's kind of poetic. Do you agree with that? Do you find you're also having to practice that skill, or are you a bit more maximalist?
No, the zen of skill writing is something we not exactly in those terms, but we talk about it quite a lot. And there's a skill in our repo called compress skill, and
Mm.
it tries to pull out pieces of the skill that are extraneous or duplicative, and get down to something that expresses the core idea of what we're trying to do and why we're trying to do it, and tries not to over specify. I think we think of what we're doing as building pieces of a workflow that people are going to use, and we don't really know how they're going to use it. And so it's incumbent on us to be out of their way and empower them when it matters, and build things that are really powerful when it matters. But sometimes just to say, you know what, it's better for us to let the model ask the person a question, or to look in the context for the answers that it needs and then ask for them if it doesn't have them, than it is to overspecify a particular process. And I think that makes the skills more, and tools as well, more composable. One of the things I think we found is that there's this idea of providing examples as being better than being prescriptive about what something should do, is instead showing it what
Yeah.
it should do. And one way we've built on that is to use templates quite a lot. So we found there's a couple of cases where we've just said all we need to do to make the model's behavior change and to get it to extract different information is change the output template that we give it.
It can become quite brittle, can't it?
Yeah.
I think the relationship also between agents and skills is very interesting because it feels like it's shifted around a bit as Anthropic has sort of decided what they want to do there almost at times, and how much intent you put into an agent file versus how much goes into individual skill files. And even like at this startup I was working in trying to automate tedious repetitive work, the whole principle was that actually you'd have this agent that effectively made skills as it needed them. It would be an organic thing. It would be able to produce the skills. But that thing between agents and skills, how do you look at that? Where do you choose to draw that line?
The approach we take is this: few builders, few agents. We are conservative about the number of skills we build as well. I think our approach is that the tools that people like Anthropic are building are in everyone's hands. They're promoting skill building in these apps. They help people to do it. People are reading about this themselves. It's out of our hands to control what skills get built and how people solve their own problems. And actually, that is great. That is organic learning for people. That is discovery on our behalf. We can use what people are doing themselves to improve our own our own work. So why we would ignore the opportunity to learn from that? We just wouldn't.
Yeah.
I would say that I think our skills are really our product, and the agents are sort of execution environments. They're the intelligence that knit together the use of the skills with a particular
Hmm.
objective. And so I don't know why we would change the context for an agent.
Yeah.
It just seems we would be making the agent dumber in the same way that overspecking a skill does.
Exactly. So I find this so interesting because I had basically gone the same, all in on skills, and said, frankly, the kind of harness is the
Yeah.
best, most useful idea to kind of revolve around. And then I had a call with one of the Claude Code team, and I said to them, what features would you really encourage us to lean into? And they were adamant sub-agents and agents and that direction. And I think probably some of it is that pragmatism of it is your job right now with these models to do this stuff versus you are at Anthropic, you're in constant fast mode. Half the time you're working on the next model is powering what you're doing, right? And so you sort of know what's possible there. Yeah.
I wonder if there's a bias here towards the coding context
Hmm.
where there's very
Hmm.
high and at a frontier model company where the fluency with this terminology is very high, and people are used to working in their editor, being able to edit agents files, being able to, they're familiar with the internals of Claude Code. I think that that's probably the more unique thing about that context, is that everyone is very focused on that.
So looking at the kind of work you're doing, there's so much that's possible and so much is satisfying, especially since, late last year. What kinds of challenges do you find you're still kind of getting stuck on? And you are a bit like, this bit isn't going to go away.
Hallucination is always
Yeah.
always a thing. It's a lot less bad than it was, but we still do see it. And I think maybe the second order problem there that's even harder is detecting hallucination. As soon as we're working really at scale in and we're handing off work to agents to go to do in the background, so like every active deal we have in flight, we're doing some work on continuously, picking up a hallucination at the top of the stack there that then cascades down and becomes the truth that a particular person in leadership acts on to help a deal go over the line. That can be quite a problem if we get that wrong, and it can be very hard to detect. So that's definitely a problem that I haven't really solved. I think we could do more work on finding certain needles in the haystack, or perhaps adding QA steps to what we do so that we try and assemble some kind of ground truth. I think you have to have some mechanical and ideally human-driven way to generate ground truth so that you can then actually score what the LLM did.
Have you seen the Karpathy wiki stuff that he posted at just the end of the last week?
No, I haven't.
Easter.
You'll have to send it over to me.
Well, I mean, in essence, I thought it was something we were all already doing, which is that you have effectively, Obsidian does this, by the way, it links notes together, but you effectively build a little wiki of the people you work with, the projects you're working on, the companies you work with, and it's just text files and it's just a log, right?
Yeah.
But it's kicked off over the weekend, and very early on I started doing that because I was doing it for myself in Obsidian more or less anyway, right? I'm writing about the work I'm doing, and I did day notes, and that was super useful to hook that up to Claude Code. And I think it's easy to underestimate, but a lot of people just don't know that that's a possibility. And just some of this stuff feels like no-brainer stuff, but it's also like the interface level, where I keep coming back to the idea that we're in this terminal and it's this nice kind of transient direct access to the fire hose, but we're missing some of these persistent objects and this sense of again, the world. And it feels like it kind of connects to what you were describing there too. But how much are you exploring stuff there? I think you've said before you had a repository maybe of the company and how it worked, or you had like handbooks or guidebooks.
We've spent a lot of effort making critical information available to the agents when they need it. We try to prepare everything that the model will need so that it doesn't have to explore that resource. It doesn't have to fail several times. It does an instant in context learning thing. And that in a way is a memory, because what's happening there is we're working out what will be an effective way to query that resource in advance by looking at query patterns that already exist and almost memorizing that. It's like the model has seen hundreds of those over time and has built a somewhat abstracted version of that in its own in its own mind, but we just deliver that at, just in time, in a sense. So it's sort of, I guess just in time continuous learning in the context window. I think a lot of the reason why files on disk works really well for things like assistant repos, which I have one of those. Like, it sounds very similar to what Andre's doing, or what we're doing with our knowledge base for our internal applied AI. It's the same kind of idea. It's pre-prepare information as if they were memories, as if they were built-in knowledge, so that you can load them just at the point where they're needed. And the best way to load them seems to be to load from files on disk. I remember when I first started to get into the agentic stuff, as it pertained to kind of human day-to-day use of LLMs, and I got quite obsessed with retrieval augmented generation and using vector databases and trying to understand how embeddings could be used on the query path embeddings and retrieving. And actually, in reality, we have never really needed those. There is some in our AI products. It works really well where we need it. But I've also done work on comparing different search methods, where we're comparing a vector-based model for memory retrieval to a keyword-based model, and to some just basic string comparison. And for the effort that it takes, and frankly, just on raw performance, the keyword stuff works quite well, adequately. On that side, it just seems to me that making the right files available, and then to the wiki point that you were talking about, that's exactly how we structure our actual knowledge base, which we push to everyone. So when we distribute our plugin, we also distribute a pre-built knowledge base, which is interconnected just by file paths and index files. So we've written a bit of code which synchronizes data from and information from all different sources, from Notion, from other GitHub repos, from websites, lots of internal stuff, and we compile that together and we index it and build little descriptions, and we just show Claude the entry file. We just say, here's your knowledge base. If you need it at any point, there it is, and it will find what it needs with high solid recall. And that's really amazing. It consistently amazes me. But if we even had to do a thing where we had to zip the knowledge base up because Anthropic kindly added file number limits to the plugins, and we just wrapped it up in a zip file, and Claude went, "Oh, I'm supposed to look in there, but it's a zip file. I'll just unzip it." And it's things like that I just think of almost magical. They make me laugh when I see them, because they're so. It's so obvious that it would do that, and yet so unexpected that it would do that in a way. Because as a software engineer, you'd be like, "Oh God, now I have to detect a zip file and find a place to unzip it." And no, the model's just like, "Oh, I know how to use unzip, so off we go."
God, that stuff's enjoyable. But look, everything you talked about there was like, here's how to use our product. Have you ever considered? Let's say you're working with someone relatively non-technical. You're going to try and help them in go-to-market or somewhere like that.
Yeah.
Giving it a file saying, "Here's Andrew."
Do exactly that. Yeah.
You do? Interesting.
Yeah, we have a skill that is effectively called customization in process, but it's effectively customization, and it asks someone questions, and then it says, "Okay, here's a kind of useful bit of prompt that you should drop into your settings in Cowork, and then we'll know who you are." I think that an additional step I would like to take, but we haven't done yet, is pre-build a version of that for everyone in the company automatically. Keep it continuously updated and push it out with everyone's plugin, and then you work out who the person is and apply a bit of context. That would be really cool. What we've done so far works okay, so it's fine. But I think that sort of speaks to an idea that we're playing more and more with, which is if it's cheap to do, just do it all the time automatically.
Yeah.
And then maybe the last piece of that is to observe what's actually used in practice and trim and learn from that. But I think we may end up doing something like that, which is we prepare summaries of everything all the time, all at once, for everyone, and just make it available to the model and say, if you need it, here it is.
Everything everywhere all at once. Yeah, I mean, you wonder if some of that, again, we talk about abundance, but like you get into like, what was it, Kairos or whatever, these alleged models that might appear in the near future. But, it's dreaming overnight, and it's building that map overnight, and it's pruning it, and it's asking interesting questions. It feels like we're so dipping our toe in the waters of what's possible while you're asleep. It's
Yeah.
anyone who's ever had a colleague in a different time zone. It's an
Yeah.
absolute joy. It's much better than the colleagues you work with in the day, frankly, sometimes. So really interesting. And for these individual files, what do you think are the key factors that the model needs to know?
I think it has to be thought about quite carefully, because what I think really matters to people in practice is that the model somehow magically knows how they like to be, how they like to work, how they like to be communicated with, what their priorities are within a given context, what written style they prefer, what time of day they want that to arrive. And I don't think you could. Well, actually, I don't know. You could try to sort of produce a quite, a quite sort of broad summary of that. But I think in practice, what we might want to do is work out what's the high signal information that would actually influence the model or the agent in a positive way, and then do some quite targeted work to pull that out from people. So the way I've gone about that at the moment is our memory system. Anytime you say, please remember X, or don't do that again, or summarize that, it will pick that up, and it will say, I can remember that, so that the agent will work on like that on your behalf. And so I think you're using the signals the user gives you to work out what to include in that kind of sort of personalization, customization space. I think that the idea that the memory is somewhat adaptive to what you prioritize in telling the model, that probably is the right formula, because otherwise
Yeah.
you'd end up too broad, either too broad and it's not useful to anyone, or you have to ask everyone individually. And I think that doesn't work, because it's a bit like a sort of setup wizard, which I don't think
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
fits
Yeah.
well with the agent approach. I mean, I like using the ask user question tool, and I like making
Yeah.
skills that will ensure that the certain questions get asked, and I use that a lot in planning with Claude Code. But I think
Mhm.
for some people who just want to get their job done, it doesn't make sense to sort of interrupt them.
So, looking at your role, I mean, what piece of advice would you give someone starting a role like yours tomorrow?
I wrote a post this morning on LinkedIn a little bit about what I thought were the foundations that made us successful in being able to move, to the extent we've been successful in being able to move as fast as we have, and help people. And we've had really positive feedback internally. So I think the summary is it's worked here. I think some things were
Mm.
true that we benefited from, and that I would definitely advise other people on. One of them is that we benefited enormously from the work our data team had already done, that provided a foundation for us that we could just immediately build on. If you were starting from a place of poor data warehousing, poor data centralization, data hygiene was in a bad place, it's very hard for just an applied AI team to go in and polish on top of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
We needed that, and that was really important. I think so. That's certainly one thing. I think another thing is that we approach this as a product, and we approach this very much as we need to go and sit with people and understand their day-to-day work, and really, really deeply empathize with where the friction is for them. Listen really to what they're telling us, and then try to, in the way a product manager does, or a really great founder does, look at that a slightly different way, so that the tools we had available applied really, really well. So shift the perspective a little bit, so that we could say, well, if you tease that apart, that's actually two skills. And that first skill is applicable to everyone we've spoken to. And this second one is perhaps a bit more specialist. But if we decompose like that, we're in a good place. And I think that kind of listening, discovery, product approach, combined with the ability to just go and ship it, I think is what was really important. And then I think people coming into this space, if you're not already spending a really significant amount of your time trying things out for yourself, people building their own sort of personal assistant operating systems, or really pushing the limits of your Claude Code environment, or writing skills, writing plugins. If you're not doing that, it's going to be, I think it's hard to imagine that you would make a big success of applying AI in this context, because you have to simplify for everyone. You have to find common patterns. You can't rely on people being able to sort of jump in the editor and fix the MCP configuration, or fix the token setup, or know to restart a virtual environment.
As you were talking there, it reminded me of this conversation about the old product triangle, where you've got product managers, designers, and engineers traditionally. But of course, now all of them can do bits of each other's jobs, or feel like they can. And in a sense, it seems to have fallen away and being replaced by more of a sense of personality of like, can you sit there and listen to actual users with empathy, with creativity, with curiosity, with this different thing? Like if you're going to bring someone in to do your kind of role, how do you check for that? How do you find good people for this work?
That may always have been the necessary prerequisites of someone who's effective in any role of building things for humans. Where I am now at Incident, almost every engineer is called a product engineer, and the interviews are very good at and designed for distinguishing who has a good product sensibility and who puts the user at the center of what they're thinking and doing. And tip for people if you want to join Incident and we're hiring is make sure that the user is at the center of what you're thinking about in your, it should be in your day-to-day life anyway, or your working life, I suppose, but it's certainly in our interview process, because it is very important to us that as you build stuff, you're thinking about the user. And we have a probably quite an unusual product manager to engineering ratio. We rely very heavily on engineers being very thoughtful about that and being excellent collaborators with design and product, so that I think the boundaries and the barriers I hope the barriers and the boundaries there are very low, or if there's any barriers at all, and it's much more fluid. And we've got designers shipping features, and we've got engineers doing design, and we've got product managers shipping things and doing designs, and everyone's doing research and talking to customers all the time. So it's a skill set that certainly we value very highly, as something that's always been important. I think that user empathy plus an ability to clearly and effectively delegate and articulate your own thinking is probably a quite important combination. I wonder if people who were poor delegators in their real life, in their working life before LLMs, will struggle with agents and with LLMs because they're not so good at articulating themselves, perhaps.
It's funny as well, isn't it? Because I think this technology is a bit of a like sorting hat of some people are discovering this, going, wow, I can build stuff. And they go into their little cave and they build something without talking to anyone else.
Yeah.
And they come out and they're like, ta-da! And of course, it's what has always happened with products where no one cares because it's not quite right. And yet at the same time, I feel like a whole new generation of non-technical people have gone down the rabbit hole into the exciting, like intoxicating feeling of making things, and are about to hit that moment of like, oh, I need to start by talking to the people I'm making it for. And then we start making the thing. And that, you know what I mean?
I think what is incredible about this moment is that for people who want to build stuff, they're empowered to. And people who probably never thought building an app for themselves, just that solves their own problem, which is, I think, is often the place to start. If you solve your own problem really well, there's a pretty good chance you'll solve other people's. I think those people, it's extraordinarily empowering, and I really feel a responsibility to make sure that the technologies we develop and the tools we build are empowering for those people, that they don't feel we're shutting the door to them, that instead we're saying yes and yes and yes and so it's my favorite thing when someone here comes and brings their laptop over and goes, look what I did with Claude, isn't this cool? I built this app for myself and I can finally do this particular part of my workflow, and it's just fantastic when we can do that. So one of the things I'm thinking about a lot is how do we say yes in a safe, reliable, maintainable way? Because I think my responsibility is make sure that to the extent we're able to say yes, to the extent we're empowering people, it's safe, it's repeatable, it doesn't create a rubbish heap of poorly built vibe coded apps that are riddled with security holes. How do we make it so that we can say yes, you can build that, and it will be safe from a primitive level up? How do we put the components in people's hands that enable them to build things? So we're working on that a little bit to try to work out what it would look like for us to let people safely build what they need for their day-to-day job, and for us to get more out of the way and be more empowering, but also be responsible for the infrastructure and the deployment and security upgrades and all these kind of things that you have to do, because ultimately this is still software. You can't avoid that.
Look, Tom, I've really enjoyed this conversation. Great to dig in a bit more detail on some of these areas and see what you're thinking, and plenty to think about there. So really appreciate your time, and I hope we'll see you again at Claude Code Curious very soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.